The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, welcome back to Blaby once again. We've done 5 so far in this district of Leicestershire. By the end of this week, we'll have 10. So we'll have double our money. Double your money and take it away. Do you remember that game show? The older viewers might, the younger viewers certainly won't. Anyway, I'm digressing. So we're beginning here at a church, which is kind of a church within a church, this one. It's kind of 2 buildings in one. You can see there's very much a church at this end, but this end, it's ruined. You can find this peculiar looking building in the parish of Elmesthorpe. Elmesthorpe, Ethelmer's farm. This week on TVI we're back in Blaby in the southwestern corner of Leicestershire, and we're only a few miles away from Hinckley. All 5 of the villages this week sit just to the east of that town, between it and the route of the M1. First up we have the lovely village of Elmesthorpe. This is one of those places that's had various spellings over time. Originally, it was called Elmesthorpe, but when it had that title, it was a very different place to what it is now. You see, Elmesthorpe has moved somewhat over the past 1,000 years. The village has been inhabited from at least Roman times, although exact dates are impossible to ascertain. What's known though is that in the medieval period, Elmesthorpe was located around the Church of St Mary, which is partially in ruins today. The Black Death killed off a lot of the population, and the ruined church is the only thing left to remind us of the lost village. For almost 500 years after that event, Elmesthorpe almost didn't exist. It wasn't until the mid-19th century when it started to grow again, thanks to the railways. When it did, it reinvented itself about a mile south of the old village, growing up around the route of a railway line and a pub called the Wentworth Arms. Since then, it's expanded back towards the old village, giving us a long, linear settlement to deal with. Let's go walking and see it. The 1900 map for this one reveals just how much has changed in Elmesthorpe over the past 125 years. This is what the place looked like, and as you can see, it barely registered on the map. The main cluster of settlement at this time was in the south, around the railway line. Victorian Elmesthorpe was literally just that, a little hamlet which was centred on the railway station. Look closely though and you can see where Elmesthorpe used to be. To the north, about a mile away, is the site of the old village with the Church of St Mary that was rebuilt in the 1860s. There was virtually nothing in between the two. When Elmesthorpe was rebuilt in the 19th century, it migrated south, leaving the remains of the old village to the north, all on their own. This is why the place today is such an elongated village, because modern expansion has gone back north. That expansion hasn't really altered much layout-wise. All it's really done is added houses along the road connecting the old to the new. The church is still there in the north today, as is the Wentworth Arms pub in the south. The station has gone though, but we can still see where it was. So all that means we haven't got much of a walk to do in this one given its layout. This is how we'll cover Elmesthorpe. We'll start in the northwest in what was the old village. Our main focus there will be the partially ruined Church of St Mary and the new village hall just around the corner. Then, given the rest of Elmesthorpe is to the south, we'll drive through the village to the old railway station and the Wentworth Arms. When we reach the pub, we'll hop out again and cover that, as well as the site of the station. Simple enough, right? Let's move. This is the partially ruined Church of St Mary, which dates back to the 13th century originally. This is one of the most peculiar buildings in the country because it's literally a church within a church. The original building had long been in ruins by the mid-19th century. In 1869, this was partially rebuilt on a much smaller scale within the ruins of the older church. The new structure occupies the eastern end of the old one and is accessed through the tower from its western end, which has been left as ruins. It's a very odd setup, but somehow it works. Even the older church is not the first to have been built on this site. It's believed a religious building of some sort existed here shortly after the departure of the Romans and may have been made of wood. The church, which stands in Elmesthorpe today, is built of a hard stone, common to this neighbourhood. Elmesthorpe shares a link with the Battle of Bosworth thanks to the ruined church. At the time of the battle in 1485, Elmesthorpe as a village was almost non-existent and the church was completely in ruins with the exception of the tower. This was handy though for King Richard III. For 3 nights, he and his troops stayed in the ruins for shelter on their march from Leicester to the battle. It's believed the king and his officers sheltered within the church, whilst the many soldiers that made up his army simply camped outside. In 1650, only half of the lead remained on the roof and the nave was overgrown with nettles. People did at least find a use for the ruins. Part of the inside was made into a garden and the nave was used as a cattle pen, whilst the outside of the north wall was covered by ivy. Tradition says that despite being in a pitiful state, a faithful few still worshipped in the ruins once a month. There were 2 bells in the tower, although only one remains today. In 1763, the church was nearly demolished, and had it have been, its stone would have been used to repair the highways. The fact the ruins are still here is all thanks to the Dean of Salisbury. In the mid-18th century, he visited the church and considered it obligatory that it should be restored back to its former glory. As such, he instituted himself as a rector, although he took no active part in the functioning of the church. Had that not happened though, it would have come down. It was through his initiative that it was saved. Elmesthorpe wouldn't get a new church until the present one was built on the foundations of the ruins at a cost of £600, although the nave has never been restored. So even though this nave hasn't been completely rebuilt, it is still kind of in use because, as you can see here, it's been turned into kind of a little storage space for stuff. There's like a little shed here, which is against the wall of the chancel, if you like. And over there, you can see there's a little sign just there. That says the word wedding on it, which I assume they put outside on the road when people are looking for this church when they're coming to a wedding. You can sit in here as well. There's a bench in this corner. It's actually quite a nice little spot, this. Now, just before we leave this church behind, I'm going to take you out into the graveyard because as I was walking up to this church, I noticed a grave. It caught my eye. Let's see if we can work out who lies in it. Okay, so this is the grave in question, and as you can see, it belongs to Natasha Louise Batston. Now, what sort of attracted my attention to this grave is the fact that before her name, you can see the letters on the left-hand side, DC, and DC stands for Detective Constable. This was a member of Leicestershire Police, who, according to Google, died suddenly last year, just before Christmas, on the 21st of December. So there's no foul play here, there's no criminals involved, it was just simply a sudden death. So at the age of 49, a member of Leicestershire Police lies in this graveyard here in Elmesthorpe. Not often you see a policewoman's grave, a policeman's grave, is it? But yeah, there you go. Now we're around the corner on Wilkinson Lane. This is where you can find Elmesthorpe's Village Hall. It's a magnificent community centre around which the life of the village revolves. I didn't find out a lot about this, but it's everything you'd expect from a normal communal venue. The Village Hall, though, does give us a handy vantage point for something else that's historically important. Stand in the car park and you'll be facing Elmesthorpe Farm. Now, somewhere over there, there was once a grand mansion and it was called Elmesthorpe Hall. It was lived in by a guy called Lord Cullen. His ancient hall stood on an eminence and was a large extensive building with gardens and pleasure grounds. They featured a tremendous oak tree, which was probably the most notable feature of the whole estate. There There were also large pools or fish ponds covering 6 or 7 acres apiece. The largest was called the Old Pool, and it had 26 islands in it with trees growing on them. A brass seal was once found in the gardens bearing the words Charnel Arms, and it was considered of great antiquity. Cullen was lord of the manor and remained so until he was forced to sell up to pay off debts. They had been run up by the extravagance of his wife Catherine. In 1720, the village passed into the hands of Lady Noel Byron and eventually came into the possession of Lord Viscount Wentworth. As we know already, Elmesthorpe has migrated south. Having now dealt with the older, more northerly section, it's now time to see what it became in the 19th century. Let's tell Elmesthorpe's story as we drive through it to reach the old railway station. In 1297, Elmesthorpe had numerous farms and around 40 to 50 families. That was a really high population in those times, and it was chugging along nicely. That was until the Black Death came along, causing widespread fatalities and a failing economy. For a while then, the village depopulated. There was even a point where it almost completely disappeared, causing the church to fall into its ruins. It was never totally abandoned though. By the turn of the 18th century, a kind of slow recovery had begun, but it wasn't anything special. As part of that recovery though, in 1710, a house was built for a man called Mr. Storer and was kept for a number of years as a pub. In later years it was known as Church Farm and was owned by the historian Richard Folk. Folk turned it into a museum, regarded as the best of its kind in Leicestershire. He issued a farmer's wage token and only 18 of them were ever made. They were halfpenny tokens struck in 1800. On one side was a wheat sheaf and a plough, and the other side was embossed with the ruins of Elmesthorpe Church. One was found in the 1980s and sold for £520. It wasn't until in 1863, when Elmesthorpe gained its own railway station on the South Leicestershire Railway, that it was able to recover properly from its population slump. The station encouraged a new village to grow up around it, with workers' cottages and an inn built by the Earl of Lovelace. Since then, businesses have come along and gone again. The most notable one arrived in the 1920s. It was a boot and shoe manufacturer called Harvey & Company. The 1960s saw both the railway station and the shoe factory close, although by that time the village was much larger again. That's because in the 1930s the government initiated a scheme which brought families from depressed areas to make a living from the land. In 1935, Church Farm was purchased by the Land Settlement Association, and they built 43 small holdings. In the 1960s the scheme ended, but many of the small holdings were then purchased by their tenants. The remainder was sought after by townspeople who wanted to keep horses. Church Farm House later became a private school. So, in all, from the time of the railway to now, Elmesthorpe has transformed itself from a virtually non-existent village to a pretty sizable place. It now has a population of 500 or more, far exceeding what it was registering in the medieval times. And if you drive through Elmesthorpe like I've just done, you pass on the right hand side the Badger's Mount Hotel and Restaurant. Did you spot it? If you did, well done. Anyway, we're now at the southern end of the village, and here you can see we have the pub called the Wentworth Arms. We'll talk a bit about this in a moment. We have the station to deal with first though, which is right next to it. There's the bridge, which we drove over a second ago, and the site of the station is just down there. So, this here, which is a little industrial estate now occupied by a fencing company, is the site of the old Elmesthorpe railway station. Here's how this came about. In 1860, royal assent was given for the extension to Leicester for an existing railway which ran from Hinckley to Nuneaton. This completely revolutionised Elmesthorpe because the new line was to pass through it. The station, which sat here, was built in 1863, and before you knew it, families from much larger places like Barwell and Earl Shilton flocked to it so they could board trains to Leicester. That's not all. Elmesthorpe station was industrially important too. Lairage pens of livestock and a weighbridge were erected next to it. Every commodity imaginable was conveyed to and from the station for transport, with coal, of course, being a popular one at that time. Elmesthorpe had taken on a new lease of life, and that hasn't stopped, despite the fact the station hasn't lasted into the present day. It was closed in 1968 as part of the beaching cuts, with its yard now this little industrial estate. The railway line, though, is still in use. Before the railway came to town, there had been some other minor improvements around here. For example, Lady Noel Byron had improved the land in Elmesthorpe by draining it, and had also improved the roads. Now, Lady Byron was otherwise known as Baroness Wentworth. The Wentworth name can still be found around here today thanks to this pub, built by the Earl of Lovelace. He commissioned the well-known architect C.J.A. Voysey to design the Wentworth Arms Inn. A Yorkshireman by birth, he was regarded as the leading architect in the country at the time. The inn was duly built in 1895 with a big hipped roof and spectacular chimneys. It was built in red brick with the front sporting a recessed porch. Its most notable landlord was George Payne. He was one of the finest pig breeders in the country and once sold a large white boar to Russia for £500. As for Voysey, he also designed Wortley Cottages in 1896, which used to stand just to the north of the railway line. They too were characteristic of his style. In 1914 they were severely damaged by fire and weren't rebuilt until 1916, when Swithland slate was used on the roof instead of thatch. Now, one thing you tend to find with linear villages such as Elmesthorpe is that parish notice boards are dotted along its length. There's no real sort of communal area where everyone can access one easily enough, so you tend to find there's more than one. And there's one here at the pub, so we'll leave a card on this one. I think it's probably the best place to do so. Lots of people probably come to the Wentworth Arms for a drink, and so if they take a glance at this notice board, they'll know that TVI has been here. And that's it for Elmesthorpe. With the station and the pub behind you, you're then not far away from the border with the next village to the southeast. Now, the next one will take us to a social club where many characters from a well-loved 1970s sitcom were created. See you there. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.